My story began when my father's life crumbled before my eyes. Robert, once a respected investment banker with a corner office in downtown Boston, lost everything when his firm collapsed during the financial crisis. I still remember that fateful evening when he came home, his expensive briefcase hanging limply from his hand, his face ashen with defeat. "Sarah, where's your mother?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I had never heard him sound so broken before. I was fixing dinner in the kitchen, my fingers still damp from washing vegetables. "Mom's still at school, Dad. She has a faculty meeting today." The silence that followed was deafening. That night marked the beginning of a transformation that would tear our family apart. My father, who had always carried himself with the confidence of someone who controlled millions in investments, became a shadow of himself. The proud man who once lectured about market trends over dinner now spent his days in bed, curtains drawn, declining every job offer that didn't match his former status. "I didn't spend 20 years on Wall Street to end up pushing papers at some local bank," he would snap whenever Mom suggested a position. Linda, my mother, had to shoulder everything. Her teacher's salary became our lifeline, but the mortgage on our suburban house and David's private school tuition were crushing us. The weight of our family's collapse pressed heaviest on my shoulders. As the eldest child, I watched helplessly as my once stable world disintegrated. My brother David, 4 years younger and always the academic star, became my parents' focal point of hope. While I maintained solid grades in my advanced placement classes, it was David's perfect scores and coding prodigy status that drew their attention. "Sarah," my mother would say, marking papers at the kitchen table late at night, "why can't you focus more on your studies like David does? He's already been approached by tech companies, and he's still in high school." The fluorescent light would cast harsh shadows across her face, making her look older than her years. I wanted to remind her about my piano competitions, the ones I'd won before everything fell apart. But those trophies were now gathering dust in the basement, forgotten relics of a time when my achievements were still celebrated. The breaking point. The real breaking point came during my senior year. I had been accepted to several pharmacy programs, including one in London with a partial scholarship. The acceptance letter sat on my desk for days, while I gathered the courage to ask for help with the remaining tuition. "Absolutely not," my father declared, not even looking up from his laptop where he browsed investment forums all day. "We can barely keep this house, and you want to study abroad? Be realistic, Sarah." 2 weeks later, I overheard them in the study, discussing a substantial investment in David's tech startup idea. The walls seemed to close in around me as I listened to them, planned to use their retirement savings to fund his dreams while mine withered away. That night, I sat at my old piano, fingers hovering over the keys I hadn't touched in months, and felt something inside me break. The change. Everything changed when my grandmother visited us that summer. I remember sitting in our living room, once filled with expensive furniture, but now showing signs of neglect. The antique clock my father used to wind religiously every Sunday sat silent on the mantel, its hands frozen at 3:45. "Sarah," my grandmother's voice was gentle but firm, "Thomas has been asking about you." She meant my uncle, her youngest son, a professor of economics at MIT. I watched her hands smooth her skirt, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times during difficult conversations. The next day, my parents called me into the kitchen. The afternoon light cast long shadows through the unwashed windows, and the pile of unpaid bills on the counter seemed to mock us. "We've been talking," my mother began, her teacher's authority wavering. She gripped her coffee mug so tightly her knuckles turned white. "About your future." "What about my future?" I asked, though something in my stomach twisted with dread. My father cleared his throat. "Your Uncle Thomas. He and Patricia don't have children of their own. They've offered to take you in." He wouldn't meet my eyes, instead staring at his laptop screen where stock market graphs glowed mockingly red. We think it's best if you live with them. The kitchen suddenly felt airless. What about David? David needs to stay here. My mother jumped in quickly. His coding programs, his advanced placement classes. We can't disrupt his education at this critical point. She reached for my hand across the table, but I pulled back. So you're keeping the child with potential and sending away the disappointment? The words felt like acid in my mouth. That's not fair, Sarah. My father's voice rose slightly. We're trying to do what's best for everyone. Your uncle can provide opportunities we simply can't right now. And with your brother's trajectory. My trajectory, I cut him off, has never been good enough for you, has it? Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. The acceptance letter to the pharmacy program felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. The departure. 2 weeks later, I stood in our driveway with 2 suitcases and my backpack. The morning was unusually cool for August, and fog hung low over the perfectly manicured lawns of our suburban neighborhood. David stood in the doorway, his lanky teenage frame casting a long shadow. "This isn't right," he whispered as he hugged me goodbye. "I'll call you every day." Uncle Thomas's car purred quietly in the driveway, its German engineering a stark contrast to our aging family sedan. My mother hugged me stiffly, her perfume familiar yet suddenly strange. "We're doing this for you," she said, but her eyes slid away from mine. My father stood awkwardly by the garage door, hands shoved deep in the pockets of his wrinkled khakis. "Make the most of this opportunity," he said, as if he were closing a business deal rather than sending his daughter away. As I climbed into Uncle Thomas's car, I caught one last glimpse of my family in the rearview mirror. My mother already turning back toward the house, my father checking his phone, and David, poor David, standing alone on the front steps, looking lost and small. New life. Uncle Thomas lived in a modest colonial house near the MIT campus in Cambridge. As we pulled into the driveway, the late summer sun glinted off the weathered brass house numbers 2147 Maple Avenue. It wasn't the luxury home my parents once owned, but something about it felt more genuine. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right," Aunt Patricia said, helping me with my bags. "We thought you might like the view of the garden." Her voice was warm, lacking the edge of constant disappointment I'd grown accustomed to at home. Those first few nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake in my new bed, staring at the unfamiliar shadows cast by the street lamp through the maple tree outside my window. The house had different sounds: the gentle hum of the central heating, the distant rumble of the Red Line trains, the soft murmur of my aunt and uncle's voices downstairs. No sounds of my father's angry phone calls about investments. No tapping of my brother's keyboard late into the night. Adjustment period. "Sarah," Uncle Thomas called from his study one evening. "Do you have a moment?" His study was nothing like my father's home office. Instead of stock market tickers and financial reports, the walls were lined with books and academic journals. A worn leather armchair sat in the corner, perfect for reading. "I noticed you still have that pharmacy school acceptance letter," he said, gesturing to the envelope peeking out of my notebook. "The one in London." I felt my throat tighten. "It doesn't matter anymore. We can't afford it. Why don't we look at some scholarship options?" He pulled out his laptop. "And there are research assistant positions that could help with tuition. Your grades are excellent, and your piano achievements show dedication and discipline." I stared at him, stunned. Nobody had mentioned my piano playing in months. But Dad said, "Your father," he interrupted gently, "isn't thinking clearly right now. But you need to focus on your future, not his past." That conversation was the first of many. Aunt Patricia, a pediatrician at Mass General, helped me explore healthcare career options. Unlike my parents' laser focus on David's coding genius, they seemed genuinely interested in my goals and abilities. You know, Aunt Patricia said one Sunday as we worked in her garden, success isn't just about test scores and prestigious jobs. It's about finding what you're good at and working hard at it. Her hands were covered in dirt as she planted new bulbs for spring. Your father lost sight of that somewhere along the way. School days. At school, I still saw David every day. We'd meet in the cafeteria, sharing lunches like we used to at home. But things were different now. He seemed weighed down by our parents' expectations, their dreams for his tech empire growing more elaborate by the day. "They're talking about mortgaging the house," he confided one day, picking at his sandwich. "To fund my startup idea." "I'm 16, Sarah. I don't want to be responsible for that." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Just focus on being a kid, David. You don't have to be their salvation." Years later, after graduating high school, I got accepted into the pharmacy program at Northeastern University with a combination of scholarships and grants that Uncle Thomas helped me find. The day I received my acceptance letter, Aunt Patricia made my favorite pasta dish, and Uncle Thomas opened a bottle of wine he'd been saving. To Sarah, he raised his glass, who proved that determination and hard work pay off. The pride in his voice made my eyes water. It was so different from the cold comparisons I'd grown used to at home. My parents attended the small celebration dinner Aunt Patricia organized, but their enthusiasm felt forced. Mom picked at her food, while Dad checked stock prices on his phone. "Well," my father finally said, looking up briefly, "I suppose it's a decent school." Though David's been talking to MIT recruiters already. They're very interested in his artificial intelligence project. I felt the familiar sting, but Uncle Thomas's steady presence beside me kept me grounded. "Sarah's scholarship package is quite impressive," he counted smoothly. "The pharmaceutical industry values both scientific knowledge and practical skills." Career development. Life at pharmacy school was challenging but fulfilling. While David struggled under the weight of our parents' expectations at MIT, I found my own path. My clinical rotations at Boston's top hospitals opened doors I never knew existed. The satisfaction of helping patients understand their medications, of being part of their healing process, gave me a sense of purpose I'd never felt while competing for my parents' approval. I started investing my earnings carefully, following Uncle Thomas's advice about financial planning. It wasn't the high-risk, high-reward strategy my father had lived by, but steady, thoughtful investments in my future. Every month, I put aside a portion of my salary, building my savings, while my father still chased the next big market opportunity. The house purchase. 2 years ago, I bought my first house, a charming colonial in a quiet Boston suburb, similar to my uncle's, but with my own touches. The day I got the keys, I stood in the empty living room, sunlight streaming through the bay windows, and felt tears rolling down my cheeks. They were tears of pride, of accomplishment, of finally feeling like I had built something of my own. When David visited, his eyes wide as he took in the hardwood floors and updated kitchen, I could see the mix of joy and sadness in his face. "You did it, sis," he said, hugging me tight. "You really did it." "We both did," I replied, referring to his successful but modest tech consultancy. He'd rejected our parents' grand startup dreams, choosing instead to build something sustainable and meaningful. Just in our own ways. Family reunion. The confrontation with my father came at Grandma's 75th birthday party. The country club dining room buzzed with conversation, but tension crackled in the air when Dad saw me. His eyes narrowed as he took in my designer dress and confident posture, so different from the uncertain teenager he'd sent away. "So," he said, swirling his drink, "still dispensing pills at the hospital?" The old Sarah might have shrunk from his dismissive tone. but I'd long since learned my worth. I'm actually the head pharmacist now, Dad, and I just bought a house in Brookline. He scoffed, nearly choking on his drink. A house? In Brookline? That's impossible on a pharmacist's salary. Something inside me, perhaps that last thread of seeking his approval, finally snapped. The confrontation. Actually, Dad, I kept my voice level, conscious of the other guests nearby. Not everyone needs to gamble on high-risk investments to build wealth. Some of us understand the value of steady growth and careful planning. I could see the color rising in his face as I continued. And unlike some people, I've never had to depend on my spouse's income to maintain my lifestyle. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's hand tightened around his glass, his knuckles turning white. Behind him, I could see my mother's face drain of color. "You have no right," he started, his voice shaking, "to speak to me like that." "I have every right," I countered, years of suppressed feelings flowing out. "You sent me away when things got tough. You chose David over me because you thought he was your ticket back to success. But look how that turned out. I'm the one who built something stable, something real, while you're still chasing pipe dreams." I turned to face both my parents now. "And when David's startup struggled, who helped him?" "Not you, me. I invested in his business because I believed in him, not because I wanted to use him as my personal redemption story." Aftermath. Later that week, I composed a lengthy email to my parents. Sitting in my home office, surrounded by the life I'd built for myself, I finally put into words everything I'd held back over the years. I detailed every moment of favoritism, every dismissive comment, every time they'd made me feel less than worthy. My mother called the next day, crying. "We were wrong, Sarah," she sobbed into the phone. "I was wrong. Seeing you succeed, seeing how strong you've become, it makes me realize how badly we failed you." "Mom," I replied, my voice steady, despite the emotions churning inside. "I appreciate your apology, but it's too late to fix what's broken. I've built my life without you, and I'm proud of who I've become, not despite you sending me away, but because of it." Epilogue. Next month, I'm taking Uncle Thomas and Aunt Patricia to Europe, a surprise trip I've been planning for months. As I book the first-class tickets with my carefully saved money, I think about how differently things turned out from what anyone expected. David calls me every Sunday now. He's doing well with his consulting firm, having found his own path away from our parents' overwhelming expectations. We've grown closer through our shared understanding of what it means to break free and build something authentic. "You know," he said during our last call, "you buying that house really shook Dad up. He can't wrap his head around how you did it without his help." I looked around my study, at the framed pharmacy license on the wall, the piano in the corner that I'd started playing again, and smiled. "Some people measure success by the size of their risks," I replied. "I measure it by the strength of my foundation. As for my parents, I maintain a polite distance. My father has never apologized, and I've stopped expecting him to. But that's okay. I've learned that sometimes the family you choose is more valuable than the family you're born into. Uncle Thomas and Aunt Patricia will always be my true parents in all the ways that matter." The last time I visited their house, I noticed my old piano competition trophies displayed proudly in their living room. Aunt Patricia had rescued them from my parents' basement years ago. "We always believed in you," she said, catching me looking at them. "We still do. And really, that's all I ever needed. Not blind faith in my potential, but steady support for the person I actually am."